Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and any suggestions in the comments, and I might give you a shout out at the end of my next video. Thanks for being here and for all your amazing support. It started with the sound of my own breathing, louder than it should have been, filling the dark like a confession. I hadn't meant to stay up so late, but when you're watching someone else's child in a stranger's house, silence becomes a weight. The kind that presses in around you, makes you aware of every creak, every whisper your body betrays. The old wall clock in the hallway read 12:41 a.m., its tick faint but relentless, and I remember thinking, something's wrong. Not with the house, not exactly, but with the air itself. It was too still. Not peace. Pause. Like the world was holding its breath for what came next. My name is Claire, and if I tell you this, it isn't because I want to ease my conscience. Words don't ease what I've carried. I tell you because silence isn't safe anymore, and maybe if I hand a piece of it to you, it won't swallow me whole. That November night, the quiet had an edge sharp enough to cut. The little girl, Lucy, 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair and a stuffed rabbit she wouldn't let go of, had finally fallen asleep upstairs. Her mother had kissed her forehead, smoothed her blanket, whispered she'd be back soon. By then, I was alone in the living room, the glow of a muted television painting the walls in restless light. On the coffee table sat a box of family photographs, left open like someone had been sifting through it and abandoned it mid-memory. I told myself not to look, but babysitting leaves long stretches of nothing, and curiosity is a hard thing to smother. In nearly every photo, Lucy's mother appeared, sometimes radiant, laughing, her dark hair catching light like it had a halo. Other times her smile faltered, eyes turned distant. I didn't know her well. She was the kind of woman who looked both present and absent at once, but I couldn't stop staring. One picture in particular caught me. Lucy, missing a tooth, grinning wide, her mother's arm resting on her shoulder, not holding, just there. But her mother's gaze wasn't on the camera. It was somewhere else, far off. I was still holding that photograph when I first heard it. Scratch. Faint, so faint I thought it was in my head. A soft drag, like nails over glass. I froze. The radiator hissed in response and I nearly laughed at myself, until it came again, slower this time, deliberate. The sound was coming from the back window. I pulled the curtain in one sharp motion. Nothing. Just bare trees swaying, skeletal fingers tangled in moonlight. But for the briefest second I saw it. A handprint. Thin, long-fingered, pressed against the outside of the glass before fading like mist. My stomach dropped. I stumbled backward, bumping the coffee table so hard the photo box spilled across the rug. Faces everywhere, staring. Lucy's, her mother's, eyes darkened by shadow. I snapped the lid shut as if I could trap something inside. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. Upstairs, Lucy stirred, a soft whimper. I rushed to her room, heart thudding. She sat upright in bed, rabbit clutched tight, eyes wide and unfocused. "She's at the window," she whispered. I swallowed hard. The curtains swayed though the window was shut tight. "Who, Lucy?" Her small voice was steady in a way that made my skin crawl. "Mommy." Her mother was supposed to be out until 2. I tucked her back in, told her it was nothing, and forced myself not to glance at the glass again. But when I closed her door, I saw 3 faint scratches down the wood. Fresh. That night was only the beginning. The scratching grew bolder, spreading from window to closet, from walls to floorboards, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening. Lucy began waking nightly, crying that her mommy was calling her name, and I began to hear it too. At first, sweet, coaxing, "Claire, let me in. Don't you miss me?" But sometimes cruel. "You're nothing without me. You never were." I thought about calling the mother. or the father wherever he was. But how do you tell a parent that something in their house is scratching at doors, whispering through their daughter's lips? By the end of the week, the marks spread everywhere. On the hallway walls, the bathroom mirror, the wooden nightstand in the guest room where I sometimes napped. Always in threes. Always where I'd notice. I stopped leaving Lucy's side. Even when she slept, I hovered in the hallway, listening, heart pounding with every creak. Every breath of air felt like a threat. And still the scratching came, moving from one room to another, as if something was learning the house, mapping it like a predator. Then came the night of the knock. I'd been curled on the couch, every light blazing, the TV dead with static. When it came, sharp, deliberate, my whole body locked. "Claire?" The voice was soft, familiar, Lucy's mother. But she wasn't due home for hours. "It's me. Open the door. I just want to see her." The knocking grew louder, her voice sharper. "Open it. Don't keep me out." I clutched Lucy in my arms where she'd crept down from bed, trembling. Together we stared at the front door until the pounding stopped. When I finally dared to look, 3 gouges marred the wood. I couldn't leave. The street seemed unreal, dangerous in ways I couldn't name. And yet I couldn't stay still either. Something in the air made the house feel alive, and alive in the wrong way. I thought I was protecting Lucy, but each night the line between her mother and the thing in the house blurred. Sleep became a memory. Nights dragged with whispers, soft at first, then sharp and accusing. My reflection in the hallway mirror sometimes smiled when I didn't. Shadows shifted into faces, sometimes her face, sometimes another. Lucy cried out less and less, her small body curling into mine for comfort. Her voice quiet, broken. "She's here. She's waiting." I began to notice patterns. The scratches always came in threes. Sometimes they traced the shape of hands, long-fingered, impossibly thin. Sometimes they moved across objects, climbing the walls as if testing gravity. And sometimes they seemed to mimic our movements. If Lucy shuffled into the living room, scratches appeared on the floorboards beneath her feet. If I turned toward the kitchen, the marks crept across the counter, silently observing. I tried to convince myself it was imagination. Babysitting long hours in a strange house can do that. But the smell of jasmine and smoke, the mother's perfume, started to linger even when the house was empty. The warmth of breath against my neck when no one was there. The faint scrape of nails when I turned my back. And then the closet. It started small. At first I only heard a faint drag, a whisper of movement inside. I convinced myself it was the house settling. Then Lucy whispered from her bed, "Mommy's in there." I opened it once, cautiously. It was empty, coats and toys. But 3 fresh scratches marred the wood. The next night the door opened by itself, wider than before. Darkness stretched inside, thicker than black paint. I could feel it pulling at the edges of my vision, drawing my breath into slow, sharp gulps. By this time I'd stopped eating. My skin felt thin, my bones hollow. Lucy and I existed in a fragile bubble, a world inside the house where the ordinary rules no longer applied. The whispering followed us everywhere. I caught fragments. "You're mine. Bring her to me. You can't hide." The television flickered images that weren't there. Shadows formed in corners. Reflections multiplied. Sometimes I woke to see Lucy standing perfectly still, her eyes wide and dark, staring at something behind me. Sometimes she whispered things I didn't understand, or things I couldn't bear to repeat. I tried to leave once, packed a bag quietly while Lucy slept. But when I opened the door, the hallway stretched endlessly, twisting impossibly. The front door was gone, replaced by a wall of mirrors reflecting my own panic. A voice hissed, "Where are you going?" I sank to the floor, shaking, until morning, or what I thought was morning, returned the world to its fragile rules. But the closet door upstairs yawned wider, and then the scratching stopped. Silence. Complete. Horrifying. Lucy curled against me, trembling. Her breathing slow even, but I could feel it. Something was waiting, watching, patient. I wrote this down now because the quiet isn't safe, because the closet door upstairs is open wider than any door should be, because I can hear her voice, sweet, coaxing, irresistible. Come home, Claire. Bring her with you. I don't know how long we have. I don't know if I will make it through the night. I only know that something in that house doesn't just want Lucy. It wants me. Wants me to open that door. Wants us both. If you ever babysit and hear scratching at your door, don't open it. Don't believe the voice, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love. Because once you do, the silence never leaves. It becomes you. I'm standing now. Lucy's rabbit is on the floor. The closet is wide open, darker than it should be. She's waiting, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep us out. I always thought the quiet was a comfort, but lately it feels more like a trap. The house holds its breath when I walk in, as though it knows something I don't, and sometimes, when I'm moving from one room to another, I swear I hear it exhale, long, low, almost human. I used to imagine silence meant safety, but now I think it only means you haven't heard what's already there. That might be why I said yes to babysitting in the first place. Money was the excuse, but it wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that my own silence had grown unbearable. At 17, I lived inside it like a shadow, too quiet for my teachers, too withdrawn for my friends, too much like my mother after my father died. She used to tell me I was observant, but what she meant was that I watched more than I spoke, that I existed just slightly outside of things. Babysitting meant being inside someone else's life for a night, filling the silence with someone else's routines. The family was new in Ridgefield. Lauren and David, with their daughter Lucy. They'd moved into a squat white house on Brookside Lane, one of those 70s houses that looks like it's trying to shrink into the ground. People in town said the woods behind it stretched all the way to the old quarry, but I never believed that until I stood on the back porch myself and felt how endless the dark seemed. The first time I met Lucy, I recognized something in her immediately. She was pale, gray-eyed, almost brittle-looking, and so quiet it startled me. At 8 years old, most kids fidget, chatter, ask questions. But Lucy sat at the kitchen table like a doll left too long in the sun, her hands folded, her eyes fixed just above my shoulder. When she finally did glance at me, it was like recognition, as if she saw in me the same silence that lived in her. That first night was simple enough. Lauren walked me through the house, her smile stretched too wide. David trailed behind her, saying nothing. At one point, just before they left, I saw him pull something from his coat pocket, a small, blackened piece of metal. He rubbed it once between his thumb and forefinger before slipping it back inside. Lauren, meanwhile, paused at the back door and looked out at the trees. Her expression wasn't fearful. It was resigned, like she was acknowledging something waiting out there. I wanted to ask, but then Lucy was tugging at my sleeve, leading me to the table as though she already knew her parents were gone. That night, I tried to make her eat pizza. She only shook her head. "He doesn't like when I eat in front of people," she whispered. "Who doesn't?" I asked. "The man," she said simply. I laughed too quickly. "Your dad?" She looked at me with flat seriousness. "No, the one who watches." The words crawled under my skin. Kids say strange things, sure, but Lucy's voice wasn't the voice of a child pretending. It was the voice of someone stating a fact, unshakable, matter-of-fact. Later, when she went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. The TV glowed. The refrigerator hummed. The curtains swayed slightly as if stirred by breath. And then, static. The TV blinked black. For a moment, just before it went out completely, the screen showed not my reflection but his. A shape, distorted, bending forward. A man, or something shaped like one. I spun around. Nothing was there. Lucy was lying awake in her bed when I checked on her. Her eyes locked on mine in the dark. "You saw him," she said, not a question. The nights piled up, each one more brittle, more wrong. The electronics faltered whenever the air grew too still, the TV flickering, my phone shutting off at exactly 9:47 each night, no matter the charge. Once, as the screen died, a blurred photo of the man appeared on it, just for a second. Too tall, face fogged, but the eyes sharp and fixed, staring out at me. Lucy stopped speaking altogether except in notes, scrawled on scraps of paper. He touched the window. Don't let him in. He wants you too. She slid them across the table, her hands trembling but her eyes dry, like she had already cried too much in her life to still be capable of it. And in her silence, I saw myself. My childhood of watching from the corners, of waiting for my mother to look at me and see something other than a reminder of what she'd lost. Lucy wasn't just a child I was protecting. She was me, reflected smaller and more fragile, and I wanted to save her in the way no one had saved me. But the house was wrong. The parents were wrong. Lauren's eyes sometimes caught mine before they left, soft with guilt, while David grew calmer with each night, almost serene, like a man who had accepted a debt he could never repay. The last night it all broke open. The parents left with unusual haste. David's hand lingered in his pocket, fingers rubbing that same metallic shard. Lauren paused in the doorway, glanced once at the woods, and then at me. She whispered, "Don't fight him too long. It only makes it worse." Before I could ask what she meant, they were gone. Lucy wouldn't sit with me. She vanished upstairs. When I followed, I found her room empty. Panic crashed over me. Then the curtain in the living room shifted and the back door yawned open. I ran barefoot into the cold, the yard spread wide under a thin veil of moonlight. At the tree line, Lucy stood still, too still, as though she'd been planted there. Behind her, something darker than the trees themselves unfurled. It wasn't just a man. It was the absence of everything but watching. My legs locked, my throat seized. Lucy lifted one hand in a slow, unnatural wave. And then the figure bent low, its head nearly brushing hers, and I thought it was smiling. The next thing I knew, my mother was shaking me awake on the porch. My mouth tasted like iron, my hands were scratched raw, and Lucy was gone. The parents weren't furious. Lauren was weeping, silent sobs as though rehearsed, but David was calm, disturbingly so. He only looked at the woods and whispered. He chose. When the police came, the house was stripped bare. No family photos, no personal belongings, not even food in the cupboards. As though the family had been staged, a vessel arranged for the inevitable night, they would vanish. Ridgefield moved on. They always do. But I can't. The silence followed me home. I hear Lucy's notes whispered in my ears when I'm alone. Sometimes I find scraps of paper on my desk, in my bag, even under my pillow, written in my handwriting, but I don't remember writing them. He touched the window. Don't let him in. He wants you now. The mirror in my bathroom shows handprints that don't match mine. My phone dies at 9:47, no matter where I am, and when the screen fades, I see him just for a moment, his face sharpening each time. I thought I escaped that house, but the truth is, I brought it with me. I am the house now. I carry its silence. I breathe with its breath. And sometimes, when I look into the window at night, I see Lucy standing behind me, her gray eyes wide and hollow, waiting for me to stop pretending, waiting for me to join her. And I think, God help me. I want to. This version strengthens Rachel's connection to Lucy, deepens the parents' complicity, gives the man more active influence over reality, and pushes the ending into a personal haunting where Rachel is slowly becoming what she feared. I should have trusted the first chill that slipped under my skin, the one that didn't belong to the weather but to something else, something I couldn't name. That September evening smelled of damp leaves and faint exhaust, the kind of night that settles heavy on your shoulders. My bike tires hissed against the slick pavement, and though I tried to pretend I was only tired, what I really felt was watched. Not by a person, exactly. More like by the air itself, by the quiet that clung too close. I was 23 and drifting. People toss that word around like it's romantic. Drifting, free-spirited, floating with the current. But drifting, at least the way I lived it, felt like being a balloon that had slipped from someone's fingers, hissing out air, bouncing aimless through a world that had already forgotten where you came from. Most of my friends had moved on. Graduate school, jobs with lanyards and ID badges, engagement photos framed on social media. Me? I was still babysitting, filling the gaps with odd shifts at a cafe where the espresso machine wheezed like an asthmatic, and I kept telling myself it was fine, temporary, a phase. But deep down, I knew I was circling the same rut. My parents never pressed too hard, but I heard the disappointment in their pauses, in the way my mom folded dish towels a little too carefully when I visited. "You can't babysit forever, Jane," she'd said one night, not cruelly, just firmly. My dad, in his chair with the evening paper, murmured his usual line, "She'll figure it out." He always said that, like it excused him from believing anything different. Later, lying awake in my room, I admitted the truth I'd never told them. Babysitting was the only job that didn't make me feel like an imposter. It was the only time I wasn't pretending to care about tasks that hollowed me out. But it wasn't just comfort. Babysitting forced me to confront something that had been lodged inside me since childhood. When I was 8, my parents rented a beach cabin for a week. No neighbors, no TV, just the ocean clawing at the sand. One night they went walking together, leaving me behind with a flashlight and instructions to be brave. The silence in that cabin was suffocating, pressing in on my ears until I turned on the bathroom light just to hear its faint buzz. Passing the mirror in the hall, I thought, just for an instant, I saw someone moving behind me. Not my face, not my reflection, something else. I bolted to the porch, hugging my knees until they came back. Afterward, I couldn't pass a dark mirror without flinching. Babysitting put me face to face with that same silence, those same empty halls, over and over. Maybe that was why I clung to it. Facing fear on repeat felt safer than pretending it wasn't there. When Redwood Sitters called that September, I said yes before I'd thought it through. The agency was new, small, with a cheerful website that felt homemade. I'd only been registered with them a few weeks. The woman on the phone was brisk, almost impatient, rattling off details. Overnight job, 1 child, no pets, last-minute cancellation. Good pay. Then she added, almost like it was meant to reassure me, "They asked for you specifically." That line hooked me. At 23, being chosen, singled out, made me feel less like a placeholder. I packed a bag, texted my roommate where I'd be, and biked out into the mist toward a cul-de-sac I'd never heard of. The houses there looked staged, perfect lawns, lights off as though everyone had gone to bed early. Except at the very end. The house I was headed for had gray siding, blinds drawn, a porch light that glared too bright against the damp. There were no toys in the yard, no signs a child lived there. I typed a quick message to my roommate. "Here safe, back tomorrow." My finger hovered before pressing send. Something in me wanted proof that I'd left a trail. The man who opened the door was not the father I'd pictured. He was older, 50s maybe, tall but bent slightly forward as if he was always leaning toward or away from something. His face had the pale smoothness of someone who spent more time indoors than out. His smile was polite, stretched just a little too tight. And his eyes, they flicked past me, then back, then up the stairs before returning to my face like he was reminding himself of the order of things. "You must be Jane," he said warmly. Too warmly. "Yes." My voice came out thinner than I meant. "Good. You're right on time. Come in." He stepped aside, and I brushed past him, the air between us too close. He closed the door behind me, and the lock clicked with a heaviness that seemed louder than it should. That sound lodged itself deep like a pin pressed into my chest. The house looked wrong, though nothing in it was exactly out of place. Beige walls, a couch, a coffee table, generic prints in cheap frames, no clutter, no family photos, no stacks of mail. It had the sterile arrangement of a showroom, a house pretending to be lived in. The air smelled faintly sour, like damp laundry left too long. He led me into the kitchen where a single overhead light buzzed. "You can sit," he said. His voice was careful, polite, as though scripted. I perched on a chair while he asked me questions. School, hobbies, my family. He offered almost nothing of himself. His smile faltered every time my eyes wandered toward the staircase. Finally, I asked about the child. There was the briefest pause, a flicker across his face before he answered. "She's where she needs to be." I tried to laugh lightly, like it was a strange way to phrase bedtime. "Is she asleep?" "Yes. Early bedtime. You won't need to check on her, not until morning." He said it firmly, the way you might give a rule to someone who hasn't earned the right to question it. I nodded, though unease rippled through me. He told me I could sleep on the couch, help myself to anything in the fridge, and that he'd be back around 11 the next morning. He thanked me twice, too many times, before leaving. The door shut, and then the house and I were left together. I stayed on the couch, clutching my phone. The silence had a thickness to it, as though it was listening back. I waited for the faint creak of a bed upstairs, a sigh of a small body turning under covers. Nothing. The quiet pressed harder. Not absence of sound, but presence of it, humming low like electricity you can't locate. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge. Beer, 2 takeout containers. The pantry, cans, pasta, crackers. Nothing that spoke of a child. No cereal, no juice boxes, no snacks in colorful wrappers. I started to open drawers without thinking, and in one, tucked behind napkins, I found a folded scrap of paper, a drawing in crayon, a house with no windows, just a door, and a figure in front of it. The face was nothing but a circle with 2 dark holes where eyes should be. My skin prickled. I shoved it back and closed the drawer, but the unease had already sunk into my bones. By midnight, I curled under the blanket on the couch, phone gripped in my hand. The silence thickened until it felt like the walls themselves were pressing inward. That was when I heard it. A click. Not the random pop of settling wood, but the deliberate click of a latch. Then, a soft sliding noise. I rose, every nerve raw. My bare feet barely touched the carpet as I crept toward the kitchen. The overhead light buzzed, casting its sickly glow onto the sliding glass door. And there he was. The man. He was inside, easing the door shut behind him. His face was different, less polite, less fixed. His eyes alive now, sharp. For a breathless second our eyes locked. I bolted. The front door resisted, the lock slick under my hand, stiff. Behind me his voice broke the silence, loud and urgent. "Wait! Jane, wait!" I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the night, lungs searing. His shout followed me down the street, swallowed in the fog. I didn't look back. The next morning I told my mom. She wanted to call the police, but I begged her not to. How could I explain it? An agency that had booked me, a man who vanished, a child I never saw. It all sounded like paranoia strung into story. But it didn't end. My Redwood Sitters profile disappeared. Their site went offline. The address, when I looked it up, was listed as vacant. It had been for more than a year. Still, the house followed me. I dreamed of it. Hallways stretching too long, the door at the top of the stairs. In dreams, I pressed my ear against it and heard whispers. Not a child's, but low, rasping, as though something was crouched too close on the other side. I woke drenched in sweat, the silence of my own apartment charged with that same humming presence. One night, washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the dark window above the sink. For a moment there was another figure beside me, small, childlike. When I spun around, the kitchen was empty. Another time, rummaging through my closet, I found a baby monitor tucked behind my shoes. I didn't own one. The light blinked green when I picked it up. Then static hissed, shifting into the faintest voice whispering my name. I dropped it, heart hammering. The light went out. I searched Redwood Sitters online. Their name barely existed anymore. A cached web page half erased. On a parenting forum buried in an old thread, I found a single post. Did anyone else have a weird experience with Redwood Sitters? My cousin worked for them once and she didn't come back the same. Replies were locked. The seed grew roots. And then, one night my phone lit up with a notification. You've been booked. The app I deleted months ago. Same time, same pay, same address. 14 Red Fern Hollow. I never went back. But that doesn't matter. The silence of that house has already moved in. I hear it at night, a hum behind the walls, like the house is breathing with me. I see it in mirrors, in windows, in reflections that hesitate a beat too long. And sometimes, just before sleep, I hear the soft click of a door being tested, waiting. Because the real horror was never the man, never the agency. It was the room at the top of the stairs. And I think, God help me, I was the one it wanted all along. I should have trusted the weight in my stomach that first night. The heaviness that didn't come from anything I'd eaten but from something quieter, sharper, pressing against the edges of my thoughts. It started the moment I closed the door behind me and realized how still the house was. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a place where a child sleeps upstairs. You know how certain silences feel wrong. How they don't just hang in the air, but press against you, waiting for you to notice. That was the silence in the Whitmore house. And I told myself it was nothing, that babysitting nerves could do that. That I was 20 years old and far too old to spook myself over silence. But even then, deep down, I knew the silence was listening back. The Whitmores lived on a quiet street just outside town, the kind of place where lawns stayed neat and porch lights glowed the same warm gold every evening. The house itself was tall and narrow, painted a pale blue that looked washed out under the street lamp. From the outside it seemed harmless, ordinary. That was the trick of it. Ordinary is how it always starts. They'd hired me for weekends, Fridays and Saturdays mostly, while they went out to dinners or work events. I'd never babysat for them before. A mutual acquaintance had passed my name along, and I took the job because I needed money, and because it seemed simple enough. One little girl, 6 years old, named Emily. She was quiet when I first met her, clutching a stuffed rabbit so tight its ears flopped forward. But she smiled at me, which felt like permission. Her parents, Daniel and Caroline, were polite in a distant way. Caroline kept smoothing the sleeve of her dress like it might wrinkle if she stopped, and Daniel's smile was too practiced, like the kind of smile you keep ready for strangers you'd rather not talk to. That first evening, they showed me around quickly. The kitchen, the bathroom, Emily's room upstairs. They gave me their phone numbers, went over bedtime instructions, the usual checklist. Everything about the house was neat to the point of sterility. White walls, polished hardwood, framed family photos that all looked staged in the same studio. Nothing out of place. Nothing lived in. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was watching how I reacted, that it wanted to know what I would notice. When the front door shut behind them, the silence fell heavier, like the soundproofing you get in certain rooms where you can hear your own breath echoing. I turned on the television for background noise, but even that felt wrong. The sound too thin, too hollow, as if the house was swallowing it whole. Emily went to bed without fuss around 8, curling beneath her quilt, rabbit pressed against her cheek. I read her a story, the way her mother had instructed, and she was asleep before I finished the last page. I lingered for a moment longer, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. For some reason it comforted me, steadied me. Downstairs, I settled into the couch, pulled out my phone, scrolled mindlessly. Every creak of the house made me lift my head, though. Every hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than it should. Around 10, I muted the TV just to see if I was imagining it, and that's when I heard it. Faint, deliberate from upstairs. A sound like footsteps. I froze. The Whitmores hadn't mentioned anyone else in the house. And Emily, she was small, but the weight of those steps was heavier, slower. My chest tightened. I told myself, houses settle, wood shifts, pipes groan. I told myself what every babysitter tells herself in that moment, but my body didn't believe it. I crept halfway up the stairs, pausing to listen. The air on the landing felt colder than it had downstairs. The silence had that same unnatural press, filling my ears until my own pulse sounded loud. I reached the top and peeked down the hallway. All the doors were closed except Emily's. Hers was cracked, light spilling out from the night lamp shaped like a star. I moved toward it, my footsteps careful. Inside, Emily was asleep exactly as I'd left her, rabbit tucked close. The quilt hadn't shifted. Her lips parted just slightly, the way children's do in heavy sleep. And yet I couldn't shake the certainty that someone else had just been there, in that room, standing over her bed. I pulled the door until it clicked shut, a little harder than necessary, and stood in the hallway holding my breath. Nothing. No sound. But I swear I felt eyes on my back as I walked away. That was the beginning. The next morning, when I came by to return the house key, Caroline asked how everything went. I opened my mouth to say fine, but Emily interrupted, her small voice flat. She doesn't like the upstairs. Caroline laughed a little, distracted, tugging Emily's coat on. Kids notice the funniest things, she said. But Emily's eyes were on me, dark and steady, like she knew exactly what I hadn't said. The next weekend, I told myself I'd imagined it, that I'd been tired, suggestible. I tried to reset my expectations. When I arrived, Emily clung to me as if she'd been waiting. The moment her parents left, she whispered, "You heard him, didn't you?" I blinked. "Who?" She pressed the rabbit to her mouth and shook her head. "Never mind." The night followed the same pattern. Emily to bed, silence heavier than silence should be, and then the sound again. Footsteps above me this time, pacing slowly across the hallway. My skin prickled. I wanted to call someone, but who? Daniel and Caroline? What could I even say? That the house creaked too deliberately? That their daughter whispered things that stuck like splinters in my brain? At midnight, I heard the footsteps stop outside the living room, just beyond the wall. I didn't breathe. A long pause stretched, then the faint scrape of nails or fingers trailing down the wood paneling. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles hurt. When I finally found the courage to look, nothing was there. The silence returned, heavier still. By the third weekend, my nerves were raw. I jumped at ordinary sounds. Shadows bent the wrong way when I turned my head. Emily grew clingier, watching me with that too knowing gaze. One night, after a particularly long silence, she came down the stairs barefoot, eyes wide. "He's mad," she whispered. "Who is?" I crouched, heart racing. She shook her head. "Don't ask. Don't talk to him." Her small fingers dug into my arm hard enough to hurt. From then on, the line between waking and dreaming thinned. I'd hear whispers in the static of the baby monitor they left on the counter. I'd smell something sharp, metallic, like pennies, when the silence pressed too long. Once, when I checked on Emily, her quilt was pulled tight across her face. I yanked it down, panicked, but she was sleeping, calm, as though nothing was wrong. My hands trembled long after. I stopped trusting myself, stopped trusting the house. Every night I told myself I wouldn't come back, and every weekend I did, because money has a way of silencing fear, until it doesn't. The final night was the breaking point. Caroline and Daniel left as usual, and the silence fell heavier than ever, almost immediate, as though the house had been waiting. Emily was restless, tossing in her bed, murmuring words I couldn't catch. Around 11, the power flickered and died. I sat in the dark, the baby monitor glowing faintly. Through the static, a voice rasped, "Leah." My name. I dropped the monitor, breath caught in my throat. Upstairs, a door creaked, then another, slow, deliberate. I forced myself up the stairs, each step a weight. The hallway stretched longer than it should, doors on either side seeming farther apart. Emily's door was closed this time. I reached for it, but before I could touch the knob, I heard her voice from behind me, right at my ear. "Don't let him in." I spun. Nothing. When I turned back, the door was open. Emily lay in bed, eyes wide, mouth moving soundlessly. Her rabbit was on the floor, its seams split, stuffing spilling out. The silence deepened until it was all I could hear, pressing against my skull, filling me with its weight. My vision swam. I thought I saw someone in the corner of the room, bent and shimmering, but when I blinked, it was gone. I grabbed Emily, pulled her into my arms, whispering nonsense, comforts I didn't believe. The air smelled of wet pennies, stronger than ever. I carried her downstairs, out the front door, into the night. The moment we crossed the threshold, the weight lifted. The silence broke. Emily clung to me, trembling but quiet. When Daniel and Caroline returned an hour later, we were sitting on the curb. I tried to explain, but the words sounded wild even to me. They exchanged a glance, polite, controlled, and Caroline knelt, prying Emily gently from my arms. "She sleepwalks sometimes," Caroline said. "You startled yourself, that's all." But Emily's eyes never left mine as they carried her inside. Her lips formed silent words I couldn't read. I never went back. Weeks passed, and still I woke in the night, hearing the weight of footsteps outside my door, the scrape of nails against wood. Sometimes I smell pennies in the air, though I live 3 miles away, in a cramped apartment that has no reason to smell like metal. I hear my name whispered low when I'm alone. I tell myself it was stress. I tell myself it was imagination. But late at night, when the silence grows too heavy, I think of Emily's whisper at my ear, soft and terrified. "Don't let him in." And the worst part is, I think maybe I already did. I should have known something was wrong from the moment Karen Callahan looked at me. It wasn't anything she said, not exactly. She smiled the way people do when they're trying to put you at ease, light, hurried, distracted. But her eyes betrayed her. They were soft brown, kind on the surface, but behind them lived something else. A deep, familiar sorrow, like the kind you see in someone who has been carrying a secret for far too long. I knew that look. I used to wear it myself when I was still with Chris, before I learned to keep my face blank. That quiet ache of knowing but not being able to say. Her hand touched my arm before she left that night, lingering a moment too long. "Don't worry, they're good kids. You won't have any trouble." Then, almost as an afterthought, her voice dipped low, careful. "Sometimes they wake up. Nightmares. Just remind them it's not real." I nodded, forcing a smile, but her eyes flickered in a way that made my stomach twist, like she didn't believe her own words, like she wanted to warn me about something she couldn't say out loud. Mark ushered her out, car keys jingling, his voice brisk, rehearsed. I watched them disappear into the night, the taillights vanishing down the wet street. Their absence left the house hollow. The Callahans' children, Evan, 9, and Mia, 6, were sweet in that restrained way some kids are around strangers. Polite smiles, quiet yes ma'ams, but not the bouncing energy I expected. Still, I chalked it up to shyness. We made popcorn, half-watched a movie. Mia nestled against me while Evan scrolled on his tablet. Normal, boring, until bedtime. Their rooms faced each other across the upstairs hall, with the guest room, my room for the night, down at the end. I tucked them in, said goodnight, and padded back downstairs. The house groaned faintly, settling in the cool spring air. I sat on the couch, TV low, trying to relax. But the silence was wrong. Houses always have noise, fridges humming, heaters clicking, pipes sighing. Here, it was just nothing, a silence too thick pressing against my ears. I turned up the volume just to have something fill the air. At 10:30, I heard the first sound, light footsteps overhead. I muted the TV, listened. Kids up, easy. I climbed the stairs, slow on the carpet, and peeked into Evan's room. He lay still, eyes closed, chest rising and falling deep. Too deep. Same with Mia, her small body curled under the blanket, face slack. Both asleep. I stood in the hall, frowning. The air felt heavy, charged. That's when I realized both their doors were closed now. I hadn't closed them. Downstairs again, I tried to shake it. Houses creak, kids stir. But when I opened my phone, my hand trembled faintly. Around 11, I heard a voice, a child's whisper, high and thin, then a giggle. My skin prickled. I climbed the stairs again. The hallway was dark, a strip of dim light under each door. I pushed Mia's open gently. She sat upright in bed, facing the wall. Her lips moved, whispering. "Mia?" My voice was soft, my throat tight. She didn't turn. "He said you shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. "Who?" Slowly, she looked over her shoulder. Her eyes were wide, pupils swallowed in black. "The man." A chill spread through my chest. "Mia, there's no man here. It's just us." Her lips trembled. "He's behind you." I spun, heart hammering. Nothing. Just the corner, the dresser, the dim hall beyond. When I looked back, she added softly, "He likes to watch you. He says you're lonely." My throat closed. Chris's voice echoed in my head, the exact phrase he'd spat at me during one of our last fights. "That's your problem. You're just lonely. That's why you keep me around." I tucked Mia in quickly, my hands shaking, whispering, "It's just a dream." But when I turned off the light, I could feel her eyes tracking me until the door shut. I checked on Evan. He was asleep, or pretending to well. I lingered, watching his chest rise and fall, waiting for him to snap his eyes open. He didn't. Back in the guest room, I couldn't settle. Every creak sent adrenaline through me. Every shadow seemed too dense. At one point, lightning lit up the backyard, and I saw something tall slip between the trees. By the time I pressed to the window, it was gone. But on the glass, where my breath should have fogged it, was already a faint handprint, too large to be a child's. At 1 a.m., the whispers started again. This time, both kids, voices weaving together like a chant. The words weren't English, but the cadence clawed into me. I stood in the hallway, frozen. I knocked softly on Evan's door. The whispers cut off. The knob turned on its own, the door swinging open. Inside, darkness swallowed everything. I flicked on the light. Evan sat cross-legged on the floor, head bowed. His lips moved without sound. "Evan?" My voice cracked. His head snapped up. His eyes gleamed wetly. "He doesn't like you," he said, calm as ice. "Who doesn't?" "The man." He smiled then. Not a child's smile. Something colder. "He says you're weak, just like Chris said." The sound of my ex's name nearly knocked the air out of me. I hadn't told them. I hadn't told anyone here. The door slammed shut in my face. The night after blurred, lamps flickering, doors slamming, shadows bleeding too far into the light. I found myself crouched in the guest room, every lamp blazing. My nails dug crescents into my palms. My body vibrated with something I couldn't name. The clock read 3:17 when the door flew open. Both children stood in the glow, faces pale, eyes too wide, bodies stiff as dolls. "He wants you to see him now," they said together. voices flat, perfectly synchronized. They stepped aside. The hallway behind them was darker than it should have been, thick with moving shadow. At the far end, something waited. Tall, still, watching. Its face blurred, rippling like heat. My legs moved without permission, carrying me toward it. Each step was leaden. Behind me, the children whispered, the cadence now familiar, Chris's voice calling me pathetic, needy, worthless. My heart thudded in rhythm with the chant. Then, in a strobe of lightning through the window, the face sharpened. Not monstrous, worse. Chris, but hollow. His features stretched too far, his eyes black voids, his mouth opening wider and wider, peeling into a grin that wasn't human. My knees buckled. The hum rose then, low and steady, vibrating in my bones. Not the fridge, not the house. Me. It was inside me now. My ribs trembled with it. My blood seemed to pulse in its rhythm. The last thing I remember was his mouth opening, impossibly wide, and the hum pouring out like a voice I couldn't resist. I woke on the living room floor at dawn. The house was still. Too still. The kids came bounding down the stairs minutes later, cheerful, ordinary, like nothing had happened. When Karen and Mark returned, I searched Karen's eyes. The sorrow was still there, deeper than before. When she touched my arm, her fingers lingered. Did they wake up? I forced a smile. Just a little. She nodded, slow, almost sad, like she knew, like she'd lived it herself. I left, sunlight sharp against me. Relief should have come, but instead the silence followed me. In the car, I locked the doors, exhaling hard. Then I heard it, the hum, low, steady, vibrating through the frame, through me. In the rearview mirror, for a fraction of a second, I saw them, Evan and Mia, sitting in the back seat, still, watching. When I got home, I slammed the door behind me, pressing my back against it. That's when I noticed the scratch, a thin, perfect line running down the inside of my forearm, stinging faintly, though I hadn't touched anything. And the smell, damp air, faint and earthy, clinging to me. I tell myself it's nothing, that it's over. But at night, when the house settles and the refrigerator hums, I feel it vibrating in my bones. The voice is clearer now. It doesn't whisper anymore. It speaks, and it says my name. I should have walked away the moment I saw the house. That thought lives in me now, circling, gnawing, the one refrain I can't silence. If I'd turned around, if I'd driven away before the door opened, maybe everything would have been different. But I didn't. And what happened inside that house is burned into me, a scar under the skin that I'll never scrape off. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing looked truly alive. Rows of tired houses crouched beneath leaning power lines, porches sagged, paint peeled. But the one at the end of the cul-de-sac, where I was headed, stood out. Too neat. Too straight. The grass clipped sharp, hedges pruned into geometric shapes, blinds in each window lowered to the exact same level as though someone had measured them. Even the air felt different in front of it. Not heavier exactly, but thinner, like sound didn't carry right. I told myself it was just nerves. It was my first babysitting job in months, and I needed the money. Desperation had a way of choking out intuition, and I'd been desperate for weeks. Rent overdue, credit cards maxed, student loans waiting like wolves. My roommate found the ad posted on the community center bulletin board. Babysitter needed, evenings good pay. The handwriting was neat, almost old-fashioned, with a phone number torn into slips at the bottom. I'd pulled one off without hesitation. Dana answered on the first ring. Her voice was brisk, warm in a rehearsed way. Within 5 minutes, she had me set for Saturday night. "It'll be simple," she said. "Just my son, Jacob. He's quiet. You'll barely notice him." The door opened before I knocked. Dana stood there smiling a little too fast. She was tall, her hair clipped into a glossy bob, clothes neat in a way that made me instantly aware of my thrift store cardigan and scuffed flats. "You must be Hannah," she said brightly. "Come in." The smell hit me first. Lemon polish, yes, but underneath something else, metallic, faint but sour, like pennies kept too long in the hand. The house was orderly but wrong in small ways. The living room lights glowed dim and yellow, leaving the corner shadowed. No clutter anywhere. No toys strewn across the rug. No stack of magazines on the coffee table. Everything in its place, too precisely. Dana spoke quickly as she guided me through the house. "Bedtime's 9, snack before if he's hungry. You don't need to worry about homework. Weekends are free." Her voice sped on like she was ticking through a script. Her son sat on the couch when we entered, legs tucked beneath him, staring at the blank television. He was small for 7, pale skin, dark hair that curled against his temples. He turned his head just slightly when we walked in, but his gaze didn't leave the screen. "Jacob, this is Hannah," Dana said. "Hi," I tried, forcing a smile. "Hi," he murmured, though he still didn't look at me. Dana smoothed her hands over her skirt, checked her watch. "I should be back around midnight. Call if there's anything." Her hand lingered on the knob a moment too long before she opened the door and slipped out. Headlights swept past the blinds, then darkness. I perched on the arm of a chair. "So, Jacob?" I tried again. "What do you want to do tonight?" He blinked at the dark screen as though it were showing him something I couldn't see. In the reflection, his posture looked different, straighter, stiffer. I glanced away. Dinner was boxed macaroni and a cup of milk. He ate silently, methodically, eyes flicking once toward the corner of the room where nothing sat. I felt my skin tighten but didn't ask. Upstairs, the hallway smelled close, air stale. Family photographs lined the walls, but all of them were odd. Taken at a distance, faces blurred or turned, the same heavy gilt frame around each. His bedroom stopped me short. It was nearly bare. A narrow bed, a dresser, a single shelf with a few books. No toys, no posters, no stuffed animals. The only thing of note was the mirror, tall, narrow, mounted on the wall across from the bed. The glass was mottled, the kind of antique silvering that makes reflections swim. It seemed too large for a child's room, too heavy. Jacob climbed into bed without prompting. I sat awkwardly on the edge of the mattress, uncertain whether to offer a story. That's when he spoke, his voice very soft. "Don't look in the mirror after midnight." The hair on my arms prickled. "What?" His eyes darted to it, then, chillingly, to his reflection within it, as if confirming something silently. That's when it looks back. A laugh bubbled out of me, too sharp, too high. "Scary stories, huh? You like telling those?" He shook his head, face serious. "It's not a story." The air in the room tightened. I smoothed the blanket over him, heart hammering, and mumbled something about sweet dreams. He rolled onto his side, away from me. Downstairs, I tried to lose myself in my phone, but the house made it hard. It creaked, sighed, the faint hum in the walls growing steady, as though wires pulsed with more than electricity. My eyes flicked again and again to the stairwell. By 11:50, my nerves were raw. I told myself I wouldn't check, wouldn't feed into the nonsense. But at 12:03, when silence pressed too heavy, I found myself climbing the stairs. The hallway was darker now, light bulbs dimmer, as though the house itself exhaled shadow. Jacob's door was ajar. I nudged it open. He was asleep, breathing shallow, face turned to the wall. But the mirror, God, the mirror wasn't still. Its surface shimmered faintly like heat waves. My reflection stared back, features correct but wrong. The eyes, too dark. And then the mouth curved upward into a smile, though mine hadn't moved. I stumbled back, nearly tripping, heart slamming. Jacob stirred in his sleep, mumbling, one small hand twitching toward the mirror. I fled, shutting the door with shaking fingers. The rest of the night I sat rigid on the couch until Dana returned. She thanked me, handed me an envelope of cash. Her smile was stretched too wide, her eyes searching mine as though gauging what I'd seen. I left without speaking. I swore I wouldn't return. No money was worth it. But when she called the next week, her voice tight, offering double the pay, I said yes. Because part of me needed to know, needed to prove I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. The second night was worse. Jacob met me at the door this time, barefoot, his small face tilted upward. "He's excited you're back," he whispered. My skin went cold. "Who's excited?" He looked past me, not answering, then padded back toward the living room. Dinner was silent again. He ate neatly, hands never straying. But I caught it, his eyes flicking to the blank TV screen, then to its reflection, then back again, as if he was in conversation with himself. Upstairs, he climbed into bed without a word. The mirror loomed, swallowing the lamplight. When I tucked the blanket around him, he finally spoke. "The man in the mirror is lonely," he said, voice flat, almost bored. "He wants someone to play with, and now he's chosen you." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "Jacob," I whispered. "Who told you to say that?" His gaze slid toward the mirror. His reflection turned its head more slowly than he did, eyes catching mine, mouth opening in a silent shape of words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, knocking against the dresser. He smiled faintly, already rolling onto his side. "Don't keep him waiting," he murmured. That night I couldn't bring myself to sit downstairs. I lingered in the hall staring at his closed door, listening to the house breathe. At 3:14, I woke from a doze on the couch to a sound that froze me. Soft scratching, deliberate, from upstairs. I crept up, each step groaning. The door to Jacob's room was wide open. He lay asleep, but the mirror, its surface rippled now, liquid. My reflection stood taller than me, straighter. And then, it moved. Its arm lifted, slow and certain, fingers curling toward me. I couldn't scream. The surface bulged outward, glass bending. A pale hand pressed through, dripping with a sheen like oil. It touched the floor, leaving no sound, only a faint metallic tang in the air. "Help me," the mouth in the mirror whispered. Not mine, not me. I bolted, racing down the stairs, clutching the railing so hard my palm split on a splinter. In the living room, the photographs on the walls seemed closer, the faces more twisted. I stumbled against the bookshelf, knocking a frame to the floor. The photo inside made my blood stop. A family portrait, decades old. Dana as a child, her parents beside her. And behind them, looming, the same mirror, its mottled glass catching light in a way that made the figures blur. It had always been there. I shoved the frame away and sank to the couch, shaking. My phone buzzed with a text. Dana, saying she'd be late. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I left before she returned, trembling hands on the steering wheel. But it didn't end there. The next morning in my own apartment, I passed the bathroom mirror and froze. For just a second, my reflection lingered too long after I moved, eyes smiling in a way my face didn't. And that night at 3:14, I woke to scratching in my own closet. The first time I felt something was wrong, it wasn't the house or the boy or even the parents. It was the silence of the rain. I remember it as vividly as if I were standing there now. The August storm pouring in thick, cold sheets across the windshield, but quieter than it should have been, as though the sound had been muffled by some invisible wall. I told myself I was being dramatic, that long hours and too many side jobs were catching up with me. I'd been babysitting since I was 16, through high school, through college, through the fragile early years of my 20s, when I couldn't quite admit I was stalling out. Now 25, scraping by on freelance gigs and whatever odd jobs fell my way, I thought I'd seen it all. Parents who barely acknowledged me, parents who overshared, kids who were sweet, Kids who were brats, kids who clung to me like a second mother. Nothing about babysitting could surprise me anymore. But that night, at 78 Oakwood Lane, I learned how wrong I was. I'd found the job on a Facebook group, Maple Ridge Parents and Sitters, which I usually avoided. Too many scams, too many weirdos. But the message came directly from a woman named Evelyn Finch. She said she and her husband had been given last-minute concert tickets, non-refundable, and their usual sitter had fallen through. Her tone was clinical. Dates, times, the boy's age, the pay, which was oddly generous. No emojis, no friendly exclamation marks, just logistics. I hesitated before accepting, but the rent was late and I told myself not to be paranoid. Maple Ridge was safe. Too safe, some people complained, all HOA rules and manicured lawns. I arrived at 6:30 sharp, pulling in behind their silver Highlander, the rain slicking black across the pavement. The door opened before I reached it. Evelyn stood there, smiling too brightly, her dark curls tied back, reading glasses pushed onto her head. "You must be Isabella," she said warmly. Her husband appeared behind her, Robert, tall, harried, already glancing at his watch. "Thanks for coming on such short notice, we really appreciate it." The house felt lived in but muted. Family photos lined the hallway, but their eyes seemed to avoid mine. In one, the boy, Ethan, stood holding a fishing rod, his smile gap-toothed, his gaze too watchful for a child. He appeared moments later in person, chattering away about his video game. Monster Quake 9, pulling me to the couch like we were already friends. He was smart, talkative, intent on my reactions to his endless descriptions of pixelated battles. But around 8:30, something shifted. I'd stepped into the kitchen for pretzels. When I came back, Ethan sat stiffly, hands folded, his body language entirely different. The TV menu pulsed quietly on the screen. He wouldn't look at me. The air thickened, as if something unseen pressed down on us. At 9:30, I nudged him toward bed. He resisted in small ways, dragging his feet, brushing his teeth painfully slow. Still, we made it upstairs. "Want a nightlight?" I asked, trying for casual. He shook his head quickly, but his eyes flicked toward the closet, open just a crack. His room was too neat, the toys arranged like props. I left the door ajar and returned downstairs, trying to lose myself in a book, but the words blurred. My chest felt tight. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow. Measured. Directly above me. My breath caught. "Ethan," I called, but silence answered. I climbed the stairs, heart hammering. His door was closed now. I knocked lightly. From inside came a creak, like another door shifting on its hinges. When I opened it, Ethan sat upright in bed, as if he hadn't moved. "I thought I heard you walking around," I whispered. He turned, pale, his voice thin. "Someone was in the hallway, not you. Before you came up, when you were in the kitchen." The words froze me. I tried to stay calm. "You must have imagined," I began, but his eyes slid past me toward the closet. I turned, and in that instant I swear I saw it. An eye staring out from the crack. Not a reflection, not my mind inventing shapes. Human. Watching. The next seconds blur even in memory. My body moved before thought, grabbing Ethan, dragging him downstairs, out the front door into the storm. My keys shook in my hand. I shoved him into my car, locked the doors, dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The police came quickly, their flashing lights cutting through the rain. They searched the house. They found a man in the hallway upstairs. He said he was the sitter. He had a key. He knew the family. My stomach dropped, my mind refusing to understand. Evelyn and Robert arrived just before midnight, too calm, too composed. They didn't ask Ethan if he was okay. They didn't ask me what had happened. They thanked the officers, dismissed everything, and within a week, their Facebook profile vanished. That should have been the end. But the end never came. The memory replayed, warped. Nights alone in my apartment, I'd feel it again. That eye, unblinking, waiting. I tried to move on, took other jobs, smiled at other children. But every creak of a floorboard, every shadow shifting in the corner of my eye reminded me of Oakwood Lane. Sometimes I dreamed of Ethan's face, expressionless, like a mask. Sometimes I dreamed of the closet. And sometimes I dreamed of both parents standing in the doorway, watching silently as I struggled to wake. Sleep thinned. Appetite vanished. I told myself it was trauma, nothing supernatural, nothing irrational. Yet the more I convinced myself, the stronger the unease grew. Because what haunted me most wasn't the stranger in the house. It was the way the Finches had looked at me that night, the absence of fear, as though it had all been expected. Weeks later, a letter appeared in my mailbox with no return address. One line typed, "You did well to see it, most don't." I shredded it, but my hands shook too hard to feed the pieces through properly. That was when the unraveling truly began. At first it was sounds, footsteps pacing above my ceiling when I lived on the top floor, a door slamming in my locked apartment, then objects, a photo of my sister sliding an inch to the left on the shelf, the TV flicking on at 3:17 a.m., static hissing like breath. I questioned my memory, my sanity. Did I move it myself? Did I leave the TV on? But deep down, I recognized the pattern. It followed me. I stopped sleeping at home, spending nights at a friend's, at coffee shops, even in my car. Nothing helped. The presence seeped into every space I carried myself into. Like it wasn't bound to a house at all, like it was bound to me. I called the police about the letter, but they dismissed it. No threats, nothing actionable. I researched the Finches, but they'd vanished. No property records, no digital trace beyond cached fragments of old posts. Looking for a reliable sitter, Maple Ridge. Over and over, the same phrasing. I started to wonder, how many others before me? How many after? Sleep deprived, I began to see things outright. Not glimpses, not suggestions. A face reflected in the microwave when I was alone, fingers curling around the edge of my bedroom door. A man's voice whispering my name when I lay frozen beneath the sheets. I tried to fight it logically, grounding myself in sensory detail. Count the scratches on the desk, feel the cool texture of the wall. But reality slipped. The more I resisted, the closer it drew. Until I couldn't deny the truth. It wanted me aware. It wanted me watching. I remembered Ethan's stillness, his whispered words. Someone was in the hallway. Not you. The way he stared toward the closet, resigned as if this was normal. Maybe it wasn't the stranger that night. Maybe it was never the stranger. The realization bloomed slowly, like rot. The police said the man had a key. So did the Finches. Who gave it to him? Who invited him? And if the Finches were never real at all? Sometimes in dreams, Evelyn speaks to me. "You saw it too soon," she says gently. Most never see until it's too late. Her eyes are kind, but her mouth doesn't move. And always behind her, the closet waits. I no longer babysit. I no longer trust doors or locks. My life has shrunk to the bare minimum of survival. But I write this because the silence is unbearable otherwise. Because the footsteps are pacing again. Because I know it's here with me now, waiting for me to notice. I think of Ethan often. If he was even real. If he was just another mask the thing wore. But the truth is simpler, darker. The scariest part was never the eye in the closet. The scariest part was how natural it felt. How quickly my body knew to run. As if I had always been running from it. And tonight, as the rain returns in a sudden August storm, I realize the ending was written long ago. The dread is not leaving. The eye is not leaving. I feel it even now in the corner of my vision, patient, unblinking. I will not look this time. But I know, when I do, it will be closer. And when I finally meet its gaze, I will understand what Ethan already knew. The thing in the hallway is never a stranger. It's the people we already trust. I always hated silence. Not the kind you get when you slip into bed late at night and everything hums gently in the background, but the hollow kind that presses on your eardrums until you start to hear your own pulse. That was the silence that greeted me the first night I agreed to house sit for Marissa. We weren't close friends, more like co-workers who occasionally grabbed drinks after long shifts, but she trusted me enough to ask for the favor, and I trusted her enough to say yes. Maybe that was my first mistake. Her place sat on the edge of town, a small rental tucked in a row of old duplexes that seemed to lean into each other like tired neighbors. The porch light was dim, buzzing faintly, and I remember standing there with my suitcase in one hand, key in the other, already uneasy without being able to explain why. There was no reason to be nervous. It was just 3 nights, and she was off visiting her mother. Still, I lingered on the threshold longer than I should have, because something about the air seemed different. Heavier somehow, as though stepping inside meant agreeing to more than I'd realized. I told myself I was being dramatic, turned the key and went in. The smell hit first. Not bad exactly, just unfamiliar. A mixture of lavender detergent, something metallic, and the faintest undertone of damp wood, like an attic left closed too long. The living room was neat, carefully arranged with little touches that didn't belong to someone my age. Lace coasters, a ceramic bowl full of seashells, a cross-stitched pillow with the word home in cursive. I dropped my bag by the couch, checked the note she'd left on the table. Wi-Fi passwords taped to the router, snacks in the pantry, don't mind the hallway light. It flickers sometimes, and tried to settle in. It should have been easy. I'd stayed in stranger places, hotels with humming ice machines, dorm rooms with creaky pipes. But as I sat on her couch and opened my laptop, the silence pressed harder. Every time the fridge motor kicked off, I braced, waiting for something else to fill the void. Nothing did. That was when the first sound came. A soft bump, somewhere in the hallway. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. I told myself it was the building settling, maybe a neighbor upstairs. Still, I muted my laptop and kept my eyes on the hallway, watching the faint flicker of the light Marissa had warned me about. It sputtered once, twice, then steadied. The air seemed thicker there, shadows pooled more deeply in the corners, and I found myself wondering why she'd mentioned it at all. Most people wouldn't have bothered. I turned the volume back up and forced myself to focus, but my eyes kept drifting back to that narrow passage. The next sound wasn't subtle. It came maybe 20 minutes later while I was scrolling through emails. A deliberate thump, like something heavy landing on the floor. This time I stood immediately. My skin prickled, and I hated how long it took me to gather the nerve to walk toward the hallway. The closer I got, the more wrong the air felt, as if I'd stepped into a different atmosphere, thinner and damp at once. I flicked the light switch at the end. Nothing. I tried again. It buzzed and died. My pulse thudded in my ears. The sound had come from the guest room. That much I knew. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was nearly empty. A twin bed, a dresser, a half-open closet. The faint light from the street outside filtered through the blinds enough to sketch out the shapes. Nothing seemed out of place except the closet. The door was open wider than I remembered. I approached, each step sticking like I was wading through thick air. Inside hung a few jackets, a shoebox on the floor, an umbrella leaning against the wall. Ordinary. Still, the smell was stronger there. That metallic tang, sharp in the back of my throat. I crouched, ran my hand along the floorboards. Cool, slightly damp. When I shut the closet door, I swear it resisted, just for an instant, like someone was pressing back from the inside. I left the room fast, shutting the door behind me, and went back to the living room. My heart refused to slow down. I told myself stories, old wiring, loose boards, draft through the vents, logical explanations. But I couldn't shake the image of that closet resisting me. I tried distracting myself with TV, but every laugh track sounded forced. every line of dialogue hollow. The silence between noises was worse. By midnight, I'd convinced myself to sleep on the couch rather than venture back down the hallway. I piled pillows around me, left a lamp on, and tried to ignore how childish it felt. Sleep came in fragments. Every time I drifted off, a noise jerked me awake. The fridge motor stopping, the house creaking, the distant scrape of what could have been branches against the siding. I must have woken half a dozen times before it happened. A voice, not loud, not even clear, just a whisper from the direction of the hallway. My name. I sat bolt upright, throat dry. The lamp was still on, but the bulb flickered, casting the room in a jittery rhythm of light and shadow. I didn't move for what felt like hours. My phone was on the coffee table. I reached for it, hands shaking, and dialed Rachel, my closest friend, the one person I knew would answer at that hour. She did, groggy. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, listening. Silence again. The silence felt smug. Something's off here. "Where are you?" "At Marissa's, house sitting. I keep hearing things." She paused too long. Then, "She asked you to stay there?" "Yeah, why?" "I don't know. She doesn't usually let people stay. She told me once she hates the idea of anyone being in her space when she's gone." That chilled me more than the voice had. "Then why ask me?" Rachel yawned. "Look, you're spooking yourself. It's an old house. Just put on music or something. Call me if you need, okay?" We hung up. The silence swelled again, heavy with the knowledge that someone else thought it was strange too. I put on music low, just enough to keep the quiet away. That was the only way I slept. The second day felt normal enough in the light. Sun streamed through the blinds, and the house seemed ordinary, almost cozy. I convinced myself I'd been imagining things. People don't whisper your name in the dark. That's just fatigue and too much silence. I made coffee, scrolled social media, even laughed at a video. Normalcy. But by late afternoon, the air shifted again. I can't explain it better than that. The quality of light dulled, the shadows in the hallway stretched longer than they should have, and I caught myself checking the guest room door over and over, making sure it stayed shut. That night, the noises returned sooner. A rhythmic tapping, soft at first, then harder, coming from inside the walls, or maybe the floor. I pressed my ear to the living room wall, heart hammering. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I whispered to myself, "Mice, just mice." But the tap slowed, became deliberate, almost like a message. I didn't answer. I sat back on the couch, wrapped the blanket tighter, and fixed my eyes on the hallway. Around midnight, the tapping stopped. Then the guest room door creaked open. I didn't see it. I heard it. That soft, unmistakable groan of wood on wood. I sat frozen, every nerve firing. The lamp flickered again. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. "Why are you in my house?" My blood iced. I stared, unable to breathe. Another text seconds later. "Check the closet." I dropped the phone. I don't know how long I sat like that, paralyzed. Finally, I grabbed my suitcase, yanked on my shoes, and bolted for the door. Outside, the air felt sharp and cold, like plunging into water. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I looked back at the house, every light in the hallway was on, glowing steady. I drove to Rachel's and pounded on her door until she opened. She didn't ask questions. Just let me in, made tea, and told me to sleep on the couch. I barely slept, but at least the silence there was normal, filled with the hum of the fridge and the occasional car outside. The next morning, I told Marissa I couldn't finish house sitting. I didn't give details, she just said, "That's fine," too quickly, like she'd expected it. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when my apartment falls too quiet, I hear that faint tapping again, slow, deliberate, waiting for me to answer. And when I check my phone, I swear I see a message flash and vanish before I can read it. Always from a number I don't recognize, always asking the same thing. "Why are you in my house?"